Thank you so much, Randy, for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
yeah. So, I mean, we can jump right into the work you've been doing. So I became, I kind of was reintroduced to you when came across the algorithm brought me to your Instagram page, talking a lot. You've been giving like daily, nightly updates on what's going on at the ICE facility in Portland and nationwide. There's a lot of confusion about what's actually happening in Portland due to disinformation efforts and such. But you've kind of provide a clear eyed analysis of what's happening there day in and day out. So I'd like to jump into that, but I do want to just ask you real quick before I forget. Has any have any ICE officers reached out to you about your proposal to co-write a book?
Yeah, I was thinking outside of the box. I was trying to think of how to get into the mind of the ICE officer. So I made an appeal for an ICE officer who wants to leave to find me, and we could co-author a book about life inside the ICE facility. And I just did that a couple of days ago. So I'm also planning on making flyers and sort of slipping them under the front door down there, so they'll have access. I don't know how many of them follow me on Instagram. I know they take pictures of me when I'm there, so I know they know who I am. So I'm hoping that I'll get at least one bite, and be able to write that book, because I think the world wants to hear what it's like to be on the inside. And also, these are human beings, and so I understand that there is a financial incentive. They're paying them a whole bunch of money, which in this fragile economy has to be very, you know, appealing. So there's also money to be made on the other side for the person that writes the book, becomes a screenplay, becomes a Netflix series. There's all kinds of places that we could take this. So I'm just sort of dangling that carrot out there, and I hope somebody will bite.
Well, that's a pretty dangerous carrot you're dangling, but I'm really interested in the de-escalation work that you do out there. I feel though before we get into that, we have to talk about what happened at PCC.
Oh, well. Yeah, so I've been teaching for a long time, ever since I was a graduate student at Emory University. Then I was at Portland State for 20 years. I was promoted, given tenure, promoted to full professor, and I left 10 years ago when my daughter was born, to do consulting work and teaching part time. And I've taught part time at Concordia, at University of Oregon, and at PCC. And without getting into the details, because the my union is still bashing this out, and hopefully they'll be resolved. There were some complaints about how I was talking about politics in a sociology class, from people who thought that I should not be talking about politics in a sociology class, and that struck me as odd. But we're in a certain climate right now where higher ed is under attack from the Trump administration. And so, based on some comments I made, mainly about Nazis, using certain language and certain middle fingers to talk about Nazis, my classes for the fall were canceled. So that's
Mm.
the short version of it. But I have a really good union who feels like that was unjust, and I'm hoping to be back in the classroom at some point. But as a historian of fascism, I'm well aware of the fact that in the 1930s in Germany, college professors were the first targets. People who were not ideologically in line with, Hitler and the Third Reich, were pushed out. That's why we ended up with Einstein in this country, because he was pushed out of the university he was in Germany. And so there is a very similar climate. As a student of history, I'm mindful that this isn't just about me, and a particular student's complaint. This is part of a larger environment that we're in,
Mm.
where anti-fascism is being cracked down on.
Okay. I want to come back to the broader ramifications of all that, but if we could go back to the de-escalation work that you're doing at the facility.
Sure. Well, I was really lucky to be a part of a federal grant 3 years ago under the previous administration that looked for community-based ways to reduce political violence. So we formed an organization that's called Cure PNW, and it's sort of sponsored or inspired by a group out of Chicago called Cure Violence Global, that uses these strategies to reduce gang violence and terrorist violence and things like that, to start an organization here in the Northwest to work on political violence. That that work has been really good and across the community and across right-wing violence, left-wing violence, wherever things tip over into violence. Because people might remember 2020 in Portland was a little bit spicy, that we had over 100 days of sustained protests around the Black Lives Matter movement, and some of that resulted in a few people getting killed, losing their lives. So this area particularly has a history. We've got a long history of political violence going way back, way before 2020. So we got this grant, and it was when Trump was inaugurated. It was cut shortly after that. We had somebody pop up into one of our Zoom meetings and say, "Stop working. Don't invoice anything after the Zoom call. You're done." But fortunately, we got a local grant from a local foundation to continue this work. And so, what the the idea of the project currently is, we're calling it the Grounded Response Project. It seems like a really good dramatic name. Is that there is this hot point around escalation at the ICE facility, which if you watch the mainstream media, especially Fox News, it's going to tell you that it's all of Portland, and all of Portland is a war zone, and all of Portland is burning, and all this sort of silly narrative that comes from our dear leader's addled brain. But in fact, it's a strange little corner in Portland that I would guess that 99% of Portlanders could not find unless they're going to the old spaghetti factory, because it's just in a really weird little sort of semi-industrial corner of the city. But it's about a 1.5 block area in Portland that is the intake for ICE operations in the Portland area. It's not a detention facility. They're only allowed to hold people there for 12 hours, but it's the source of a lot of the the ICE deportation rates that are going into the surrounding areas. Because Portland is surrounded by a lot of agricultural areas where there's a lot of migrant farmers and things like that, and also just people who are settled and have lived here for 30 years. So this building has become a symbol of Trump's deportation policy, and because Portland is Portland, Portland, it was on it like white on rice. I mean, as soon as all this started, the protest really started, and they've been going on for, I think, over 150 days now. I've been going down since June. I first started going down weekly, and then it started becoming nightly, and then I got a little cold, so I've taken a few days off. But my role down there is sort of twofold. One is to sort of document what's happening on the ground versus the narrative that it's violent domestic terrorists throwing Molotov cocktails. Is incredibly nonviolent. Nonviolence is highly valued down there. The majority of the violence has come from the federal officers down there. But also, when there are points of escalation, to use the strategies of de-escalation to try to calm things down to prevent things from tipping over. And this happens, and I'll just be really brief here, in kind of two scenarios. One is when the ICE officers come out. Usually it's when they want to get cars in or out of the facility and people are yelling and screaming. Sometimes things can get a little tense. So sometimes I'm standing between the ICE officers and the protesters, trying to make sure things stay relatively calm. But increasingly over the last month, since Donald Trump has started talking so much about Portland, and Portland's on fire, and Portland is, all the stuff Kristi Noem was sent here, we have had a massive influx of what we can call counter protesters, MAGA folks. Some of them are media influencers. They've got their selfie sticks. I always think of like the Frankenstein movie with the people with the pitchforks and the burning, the burning sticks, the torches. They've got their selfie sticks like their torches. So they're trying to capture their stuff that they can sell to Fox News and to CNN. Some of the stuff I've seen on CNN to prove that people are violent, but also people who come down who just want to fight. I mean, they come in they're not from Portland. Most of them aren't even from Oregon. They're from Washington. They're from Idaho. They're coming in to kind of create fights. They're buying into this narrative that there is this thing called Antifa and that they're violent terrorists and that are going to stop them. So I have spent a lot of time between these sort of warring factions. I mean, the first time I did this, it felt a little bit, I mean, older people might get the reference of West Side Story, but it felt a little bit like the Michael Jackson Beat It video, where, we've got these two sides and I'm sort of in the middle, trying to get them to calm down. And sometimes that means throwing myself into the middle of a fight and using these strategies to get people to calm down. Because the last thing we want to do is give Trump the image of violent protesters, and these people are trying to provoke it. So it's my job to kind of prevent that from happening. And the highlight would be, I guess, on the 18th, which is No King's Day. Later that night, there was a protester who was, I would guess if someone were to picture what Antifa looked like, it would be this young man who is black clad with a helmet and, a mask, being jumped by a group of MAGA people in front of the ICE facility. So I'm diving in to try to break it up. All the MAGA people are running and the protesters are running. It's about to turn into a big brawl. And then the ICE officers, which is really Federal Protection Services, are up on the roof with their less than lethal guns, which are like paintball guns that shoot out these pepper balls, shooting us while I'm trying to break up this fight, pulling people off, and these less than lethal bullets are bouncing all around us, hitting me in the back while I'm trying to break up a fight. It was complete mayhem. But that's just a typical night at the ICE facility. So, so my job, I came home that night and I thought, oh gosh, I just realized my job is to prevent a civil war in America. Like that is my
Mhm.
it's my job, because if that narrative breaks through, oh, look at these violent Antifa, then here come the National Guard and here comes martial law and here comes the suspension of the elections, and and America is in a different place. I mean, it's not just me. There are other people doing this work down there besides me, but it felt like that night that we had dodged a bullet, literally, because it was very close to spinning into that mayhem and that riot and being that thing that, the history books write about. So there you go. Welcome to my world.
I saw Nick Fuentes, I think this morning, talking to someone who made him look demure and reasonable by comparison. And this guy was saying, what we need to do is take everybody who shows up at these facilities, Chicago, Portland, and designate them as terrorists and put them away immediately. And this guy was being super performative. But with all of these people, I feel like there's an element of testing out the ideas. Um, what do you make of that kind of talk? Is it just aspirational stuff, or is it in any conceivable way part of the end game? When I went out there protest, said, okay, now my face is in the system. It's been scanned and all that, and game on. But this is what's happening. How should we be feeling when we're going
Yeah.
out there?
Well, there's a reason that I've asked my students to read Orwell's 1984, because language matters. And if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes true. And the amount of people who come down there and scream at the protesters, "You're a violent terrorist," means that there's some traction of that rhetoric, that it holds on and it just becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's very dangerous. I mean, we're in a moment where the courts are trying to determine what a rebellion is. Because if there's a rebellion on down on McAdam and Southwest Portland, then the Insurrection Act can be used, because that's what the Constitution says. If there's a rebellion, but it's just protest. But if that language gets used enough that this is an insurrection, then all of a sudden we have the legal means to address it. So the repeating of that language is very dangerous. And I'll give you a really good example. There's a young man who lives about a block from the protest, uh, who has let protesters use his apartment for bathroom breaks, basically, because there's no bathroom down there. There's no porta potties, and people are down there for hours and hours. And he's let them use his bathroom, and if they want to store their gas mask in there until they come back, he's just sort of let his apartment. Fox News got a hold of it and branded it as a Antifa safe house.
Oh boy.
And so what happens is the MAGA who come down stormed this young man's apartment and said, "This is it. This is the enemy headquarters. It's funded by George Soros or the Chinese Communist Party." I mean, whatever the rhetoric is. And this man
Mhm.
was, being threatened, and he was very calm, and he just opened the door and he says, "Look, it's just an apartment. I'm just letting people use my bathroom." But they're screaming at him again, like in the Frankenstein movie, with the mob with the pitchforks and the torches, and it becomes this whole other thing than other than it is. But you have Laura Ingraham on Fox News talking about the Antifa Safe House, and it's just this kid's apartment. So it
Mm.
becomes a
So
fulfilling prophecy.
right, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the people with the pitchforks and the torches freak the monster out. And then the monster goes crazy and defends itself and attacks them, and that's what we're all trying to avoid here as
Exactly.
much as we can.
I have to say,
And I will say,
yeah, can I interrupt just a second? I want you to ask your question, but just briefly, I have to say I love that we're doing all the Frankenstein stuff as Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein
Right.
will be out just as this drops. You'll want to go directly from here to Netflix. Please, Lab, go on.
uh, well, the other thing that freaks me out about how they talk about Antifa as a terrorist organization is once you get that like legally attached to you, you lose your basic civil rights in this country because terrorists can be taken without lawyers stepping in. They can be disappeared to Guantanamo, or they can they can just be shut off and disappeared basically indefinitely. And so once these people get identified as Antifa terrorists, their civil rights go out the window, and that becomes very, very scary and
Yeah, it's
problematic.
been very frightening to see people in positions of authority like Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem refer to them in the same breath as Hamas or ISIS. Like this is not what this is. Antifa is an idea. There's no checks, there's no leadership, there's just people who are generally connected to this idea that fascism is a real threat. I mean, I think all Americans should be Antifa. And
Right.
as a matter of fact, but it has been turned. You're absolutely right. Once you weaponize it as this thing, domestic terrorist organization, I mean, it's such an oxymoron that then all of a sudden you have the full force of the federal government to take people off the streets. And I think as a student of history, uh, I'm seriously concerned about this. I mean, I was talking to another friend who does this work on Instagram the way I do, and we're waiting for Knox to come on the door. When is the FBI going to come to have a little chat with us? So it is a moment. We're in a moment. We're in a moment. We could go one way or the other, and they want to
You
suppress
know,
us. And I think part of it is that we're afraid to take on this struggle because we are afraid of that knock on the door.
hmm. I want to step back just a little bit because we all grew up with white supremacy, but you grew up with a really specific, intense brand of it, did you not? Could you tell us about that and how it
Yeah,
led you to the work that you're doing?
yeah. My family moved to a little town called Stone Mountain, Georgia, in 1972 when I was 8 years old. And as I was telling Lev, I learned very quickly that the Civil War did not end. It was still raging. I learned
How
that
do
I
you
was
mean? How do you mean
well.
that?
That Stone Mountain has a giant mountain that sticks up of stone, thus the name. Mentioned in Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and the reason Dr. King mentioned it is Stone Mountain is the birthplace of the modern Ku Klux Klan. And Thanksgiving night, 1915, um, a guy who saw the movie Birth of a Nation thought this looks like a good idea. Assembled some old Klansmen from the 1860s, hiked up the mountain, and because he saw it in the movie, burned a cross. The original Klan didn't burn crosses, but D.W. Griffith used it as a cinematic device. And so the first Klan burning was there on the top of the mountain. I actually hiked up to the top of that mountain with my 11-year-old daughter last March and explained to her this is the site of the first cross burning. But I grew up, they marched every Labor Day. I had friends whose dads were in the Klan. It was sort of very normal in the environment that I grew up in. And then I went to this weird place called college and, stepped out of my little weird world of Stone Mountain, Georgia, and took a sociology class and thought, oh, I had a feeling that something was wrong with that whole thing. And that sort of started me on my scholarly path to understand white supremacy. So as a graduate student, I decided to do undercover work and spent about 5 years undercover in the white supremacist movement, on and off, studying mostly skinhead groups in the US and Europe, but also going to Klan rallies. I always like to joke, I've probably been to more Klan rallies than anybody in the room as part of my research. But I could do that because I had friends one of my friends from elementary school grew up to be the exalted Cyclops of the Southern Knights of the KKK, and he got me in. I would like to say in his defense, he got out about 20 years ago and married a beautiful African American woman, had 2 kids, and became a Obama voter. Went around knocking on doors in Stone Mountain, Georgia, for Obama in 2008, and people said, "Aren't you in the Klan?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did. I was in the Klan, but no." So it's a beautiful
Well, that
story. Always, when I mention my friend, I always like to mention that he did get out of it because a lot of these people do. But anyway, that was this weird world I grew up in, and so I've had a unique perspective now on linking what that was like then and what this is like now, which is why I'm doing this work now.
Mm.
yeah. So you kind of were going towards what I was going to ask you about is in your interactions with some of the MAGA folk, for lack of a better term, that are hanging out at the ICE facility or that you've come across in other forums. Um, is there a way to kind of get them to turn around? Like, what are the like? I find it's a lot of economic anxiety, latent racism, or blatant racism too. But where are we going to hold on to these people and show them the love and bring them around? Like, what are those levers?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I have been fortunate enough to walk people out of hate groups. You know, people who were hardcore neo Nazis or hardcore racist skinheads and bring them out. And, the first thing is you have to sort of peel them away from the group because a lot of this is
Mm.
performative. I'm
Mm.
performing this thing. I'm loyal to Trump and I hate the commie Antifa. It's all this performance. When you pull people aside and have a casual conversation, there are ways in. I mean, we usually start by talking about things that we have in common. Could be the weather, could be sports, could be, how this economy is going. And once you start having those conversations about where you're connected, you've already de-escalated. Like if we're going to talk about, the World Series or something, we're already, moved away from the place where we're fighting. And then we start having conversations about where we have, things in common. So that you're right, the economy is a big thing. I mean, people are feeling economic anxiety. The American dream is gone. Nobody's buying a house. People are worried about, healthcare. I mean, all these things are things that connect us. And there's so much uh, between MAGA and Antifa that is on the same page. I mean, there's a great protester down there named Darren who is a veteran. He's a Marine veteran, but he got pretty brutally tackled by ICE over the summer and it went viral. And he has this great thing that he says that I've been repeating ever since is that instead of looking right and left, we should be looking up and having that conversation about, all right, are we really benefiting from the people who are having, these lavish parties at Mar-a-Lago? Is it really benefiting the people that voted for them? And so we start having those conversations, but you got to do it away from the group. You can't do it when everybody's
Mm.
screaming at each other and be like, hold on a second, we're all being screwed by the billionaire class. That's not going to work. Or, I mean, the left does it as well. You're following a pedophile. Everybody's yelling at each other and nothing ever gets done. We sort of calm things down a little bit and have these, well, I call them asides, have a conversation to the side and be like, yeah, I know that's crazy. But you know what? It seems like you and I probably have a lot in common. And that starts it may not be the light bulb that goes off and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been completely living a lie. But it starts, to unravel a little bit of that. And having done this work with people in hate groups, it's not like, oh, I get it. Racism is wrong. I'm not going to be a racist anymore. They start thinking about it. I'll give you one. Can I give you one quick little story? I was
Yeah.
talking to I was invited to talk to a high school class outside of Portland in a place called Beaverton because the teacher had 2 racist skinheads in her class. And one of the skinheads had made a scale model of the Auschwitz.
Was this recently
So
or
this is it. This
in
is
like
in
20
early,
years
I'd
ago?
say around 2000, early 2000s. Um, and we were having a lunch. It was a lunchtime conversation, and people bring their lunch. I brought my lunch. They brought their lunch, and I was looking at, and these skinheads were not happy because they knew that I was there because they were there. But the kids were eating, the 2 skinhead kids, one kid was eating a bagel for lunch, the other kid was eating a peanut butter sandwich. And I'm like, hey, hold on, we got to have a conversation here. I don't know if you know this, but bagel, that comes from Jewish culture, and peanut butter was invented by George Washington Carver, who's black. You can't be a racist and eat these things. You should eat some, I don't know, waffles or something. And the kid, one of those kids, the kid that made the death camp, the Auschwitz death camp model, messaged me. He said, I've been really thinking about what you said, and can we talk some more? I'm starting to second guess. And I said, well, what was it? Because I was there for an hour. He's like, the thing you said about peanut butter. I love peanut butter. I don't want to give it up. So, sometimes it's
Wow.
just like a little thing in there that sort of creates a crack that gives them a permission structure to start to move away from it. And so I think that works with MAGA a lot as well, is when we start talking about things like healthcare or the fact that some of our neighbors might be undocumented and, they're contributing to the community, it creates these little cracks that allows them to slowly walk out.
Can we talk about Christianity a little bit?
Yeah.
Well, I know that
Lord.
you talked a bit about Christian nationalists, and I'm thinking more about the more mainstream Christians who, maybe mainstream's not the right word, but the Christians who sort of have surrendered their personal values because they think of Trump as the vessel for God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wonder, when is there a certain point in history? I know it goes back farther than 2016. Is it the Tea Party? Do we go back to a time when Christianity actually meant that you stood for good? That you couldn't have a I don't know, has the idea always been there that you could have a surrogate who was an imperfect person who could do your bidding for the greater good?
Yeah. Yeah, you had to open up that can of worms. I mean, so let's
I
go back.
love it.
Let's go back 60 years to the 50s. Let's go back, or 60s. Let's go to 1965, when there are two dominant images of Christianity in America. One is the Ku Klux Klan, in the Jim Crow South, who are Christians. Like, they don't burn crosses; they light crosses. They're the Christian knights of the Ku Klux Klan. They see themselves as the follower of the white God, and they interpret the Bible as, as I grew up, the God is a white man. God is a white 67-year-old man on a cloud. Adam and Eve were white. Moses was white, right? We get all these white stories. The other image from 1965 is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is reading the same exact book that the Ku Klux Klan is reading, the Christian Bible, and coming up with a completely different analysis of what that means in terms of race relations. They are the Israelites who are escaping the bondage of the Pharaoh. So we've always had these competing visions in Christianity. Christianity has long used race as a form of power. I mean, the Catholic Church did a really good job, thanks to all those stained glass windows, of telling us that Jesus was white. Jesus was not white, but I know on my Facebook stream, I'm old, so I'm still on Facebook. I get lots of images of blue-eyed Jesus with blonde highlights. Right? That is white supremacy. If God is white
Right.
and white people are the same as God, then white people are closer to God. Right? That's not a fringe faction. That's mainstream Christianity. So there's been this alternative version of Christianity that says Christianity is the religion of the oppressed,
Right.
and it is about liberation from the bondage of slavery. So we've always had these competing messages, and I think we get like this pendulum. I'm going to get a little sociological here, as the progressive image of Jesus, and churches get more inclusive and they welcome gay marriages and things like that. Then there's the counter swing back to the sort of Klan's version of Christianity that becomes dominant. And a lot of this, what we're experiencing in MAGA, is a huge backlash. I mean, the argument has been made. It's bigger than that. It's revenge for Reconstruction. That the South is going to win the Civil War, and it's winning it in the 2020s. So that we're in this battle for what does it mean to be a Christian in America. We get this swing and counter swing that happens all the time, and so that's why when we're down there at ICE, one of the best, I don't want to say tools or weapons, but one of the things that's most effective is when people of faith come down, people who are leaders in the faith community come down to bear witness. That's really powerful, because that's what I would think of as as someone who grew up in the Bible Belt. I would say that's closer to the Christian idea of what it means to be a good person. So yeah, it's a constant swing between these two visions of the whiteness of God.
as we
That's my
swing.
seminary homily for the day.
That's great. So as we swing back and forth amongst topics, I wonder too that a question that I've had. I mean, I grew up going to some protests with my parents a lot, anything ranging from like U.S. involvement in Nicaragua to Rainbow Coalition type stuff with Jesse Jackson and, um, anti-Iraq war, the first Iraq war. I remember I was in high school and we'd do walkouts and going down to Pioneer Square. I remember for a few protests um, but recently I read Bearing the Cross, the MLK, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Biography about him in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I couldn't help but thinking about with all these issues that we're facing today, I feel like there's a lot of resistance, but there's not a lot of strategic resistance in the way that they kind of had locked down. I mean, I think, the civil rights was a bit more palpable struggle for people to, recognize, I think, than Antifa, authoritarianism, those might seem a little more abstract or something, but I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit about, so like when we talk about these problems, I wonder about how are we going to effectively address this? And voting is a big part of it, right? But it also feels like to really have a truly effective counter movement, there's got to be some real strategy. And I don't know where that's playing out. Is that all, like we can slow down ICE and try to keep them from detaining more people. And that's one effective strategy, I suppose. But in terms of getting us out of this and making it more of a movement or something, that's gonna, get these fuckers out of the way. Are those conversations happening? Or I mean, I don't know if you're privy to any of that, but like, where's the strategy in this? Like, what are some of the specific goals that people are working towards?
Yeah, it's it's a kind of an interesting catch-22 when you try to have a movement that's organized by anarchists who, are averse to having any type of leader or any type of central voice. Everything is supposed to bubble up organically. And it's a challenge, and it really is this notion that there's again competing visions of one is you need a leader